that Jared is here to share some of his poetry with us. And I will also say that if you have a chance to take a class from him, please do, because I know he has a great reputation as a fine teacher of poetry and an ambassador for poetry as well. Jared.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for being here. And thank you, Diane. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, other board members. And you know, it's just great to see some familiar faces here. And I love this setting. So I was just talking to someone earlier saying, trying to find interesting places to do readings, small, intimate spaces that apparently have good acoustics. So people have been talking to me a lot about acoustics, and so I need to learn more about those. I want to read some poems for you tonight that are about things that I'm doing, interested in, invested in, and there's a group of faculty who are really interested in chaos currently. And it's the chaos that our students face more than we're facing. So whether it's tuition or sort of making sense of what you're doing and why, it's something that we're talking about, even though it may not feel like that for a lot of students sometimes, or trying to understand it, because more than ever, I think education and higher education has got to sort of figure out and give students a purpose. So that's one thing I want to share with you tonight, some things around that. And also I'm a father, and it took me a long time to write poems about my kids for some reason, and just sometimes it takes me around 5 years to sort of write from the present to where I'm at. But I've got some poems about kids as well. So the first one is called The Rising Cost of Intuition. You know without knowing why you picked her out of a lineup to perform in the orchestra for the blind. You'll be conducting like the invisible gorilla you understand you are becoming. The shooter, you can feel it in your gut, texting while driving, exonerating the brain from its primal petty conversation. With the road in your eyes as you retake the SAT in the middle of a rock concert that is your smart new life. A daily admission exam in which you forget the playlist and stick with your first answer far too often, instead of going back and making the necessary correction. This next poem is called Comes Chaos, and I had a teacher who, when he was younger, would go around to vending machines, and when they wrote down, you know, out of order on the vending machine, he would go up and write, Comes Chaos. And so this stuck with me just as a way to, you know, I feel like I'm drawn to graffiti or public markings or people making their mark and sort of trying to establish their point of view in a way that I feel like is, sometimes it's damaging, but other times I think it's sort of an improvised way to sort of stick themselves in and insert themselves at a point of view into a place that maybe doesn't always allow that, and it sort of, I find it affects people who see it. So this one's called Comes Chaos. I'm partial to the unmade bed, scruff, a messy office, wrinkles and blurred lines, but while standing in one to buy a pomegranate and cheap beer, a tidy magazine loitering in front of me comes alive with advice. Its cover contains 8 precious pastel boxes, claims the cure for my disorder is simplicity. It promises to make my life easier, me happier. It will expunge the hassle with tricks this publication can teach in just 24 effortless steps. Which reminds me of a real teacher who made it his purpose to carry a red pen and find out-of-order signs posted on vending machines so that he could complete every sentence with 2 more words. A little while back I became enamored with a list that was put out by sort of NSA, Homeland Security. Do you remember this list where it said sort of where certain words were being tracked when you sent messages, and to a certain degree, the recent information through different leaks that people have made around, the name of the guy is escaping me. Yes, Edward Snowden. So sort of the practice that had been taking place. Slowly we learned things. And there was a list of all these words that were being tracked. And I was fascinated by this. And there was a poetry contest related to this as well. And it was one that I don't think, well, it sort of ended after the news was released. It was still going on. And I wrote a poem about this, and I'll share some of the words with you as well. This poem is called There's One. There is one word you can't shout in a crowded theater. Just 7 you cannot say over public airwaves. I count 50 you can write upside down on a calculator. And over 500 you best not tweet or post without Big Brother raising an electronic eyebrow. Like pork, cloud, subway, delay. This list makes me hungry. Makes me stop off at the Cuban sandwich shop on my way home. I order a Caribbean roast, coated in a generous marinade that would make even the Department of Homeland Security reconsider the word embargo. But if you want to take a look at this list later, I can show this to you. Here's a couple other ones. Plague, Colombia, brownout, Afghanistan, enriched, jihad, snow, fishing with a PH, hacker, scammers, warning, tremor, malware. So I'm interested in language a lot of times, and I think sometimes as a teacher, I read a lot of people's work, and like a lot of you, whether it's working with language, you come across language all the time, you're sort of sensitive to it, and sometimes people use it in ways that sort of suddenly, kind of pokes you, and there's something about it that sort of wakes you up to something, and I'm really excited when something makes me see something new that I've sort of seen the same way over and over again to where I'm asleep to it. And in 2013, about this time of year, I started working with a group of students at the Seattle World School, which is a school for immigrant and refugee kids who've been in the United States for about 0 to 14 months. And they sort of come in, and it's a way to either graduate from that school, and it's on Capitol Hill, and they can also transfer out, depending on where they're at, and go to a school maybe closer to their neighborhood. I was doing an after-school program where they were just learning English. They knew English to a certain degree, but it was really about how do you have conversational English or improve your English in the classroom, or just sort of work through these things. And I was doing it with the Jack Straw Writers Program. We had I was the writer there, and there were some vocal coaches who were there with me. And they were fantastic. I came a little late on the progress of the program. I was helping them with some writing. But the vocal coaches had them stand around in a circle in the beginning. And we'd stand around, and they passed out the sheet of paper they'd been reading, and I turned around and looked down, and it was Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And I'm like, why are you having all of these kids read this poem? And it didn't even say by Robert Frost, it just had this poem. And each week we would read a stanza. And it was a lot of times because of the sounds in the poem were both hard to pronounce or challenging, but were really good for sort of just practice. And so these vocal coaches would have to do this. And so I would sit here and listen to this poem again and again and again from these students, from, whether they're from China, different parts of Africa, Mexico, other places, and sort of just hear this poem read and interpreted by them, because a lot of times they would have questions like, what's this word mean? What is this? And we'd stop and we'd just focus on it. It was probably the closest reading of this poem I've ever done in my life, and the closest one in the literature class. At the end of the session, I found myself, they wrote their stories, I helped them do all kinds of things, and in terms of writing, and I was just wanted to sort of try to capture this somehow, because this experience to me was really, it changed the way I saw the poem. And so I tried to write in response to his poem. And it's called Reading Robert Frost with Immigrants and Refugees. Seattle World School, 2014. Whose words these are, I had no clue. But our house was in a village too. I have not seen my family in a year. Has this ever happened to you? My little sister must think it weird to be without her mama near. Between new beds and classes we take, time passes like glances in a mirror. Today, teacher shared a photo of Frost holding a birthday cake. I reread his poem and tried to imagine a frozen lake. There are so many strange new sounds my tongue and mouth just won't make. These words are tricky, hard, and round. But I'm told in frozen lakes, you still drown. And it can take months before you're found. and it can take months before you're found. And I don't normally write in verse or try to in meter, and for some reason, writing that poem is probably one of the poems I cared about most recently, just because it's sort of trying to represent somebody else's experience, but it's probably one of the better teaching experiences I've had in a long time, because I really learned something from the students in a way I had never expected I would. And so, it was, like I said, it's a meaningful thing for me. When we teach, some of you may have had this experience, as teachers or as students, you get these different grades, and now we're giving most people grade points, so you get a 1, 2, 3, or 4. There are students, though, who disappear or vanish or don't come back to class, or you may have done this, which is great, except for the fact that often these stories, I'm like, what has happened to them? What's wrong? Did something awful happen to them? Where have they gone? And so this is an older poem that I wrote. And these grades are called undesignated grades, so we had to give them these because you have to report something for different reasons. This is a poem kind of for those students about that. It's called The Undesignated. Beyond A, C, and F's black forest exist other grades, a thin range of mountains wavering along the waterline. I, incomplete. Like Sid, who wrote before expulsion, I always made sure I wasn't sick on Tuesdays because I didn't want to miss the poetry. I'd never written about solid things or things I'd done before. V is about their vanishing, their academic evaporation, like the girl whose name escapes me, who wrote the story about the day her mother left her in an elevator. Just weeks into the course, before I could return her paper, she was gone. W, an official withdrawal. What I was instructed to give Brian the day after the boy died head-on, driving his mother's white car down a skinny, wet road. The grade guarantees she won't receive any more mail from the college concerning her son. Z is like V, but does not impact her GPA. It's what I gave Ashley when she disappeared. Only I don't know if she escaped the boyfriend who followed her to campus, gun under the front seat, and pulled her into stairwells and bathrooms. First a black eye, and bruised ribs, then bleeding before class when he cut her. I still have the first draft she turned in. Do dreams have a practical meaning? And a follow-up to that last anecdote, this was a student who, years later, when I was on Facebook, and I'm sort of a Facebook user for various reasons, but this is the reason why I needed it. I think it was because she contacted me and she was sort of like, I'm okay, or I'm still alive, or here's what's happening in my life. And it sort of gave me some nice closure to that. And I try to tell people that because it's sort of an awful story, or felt awful at the time. And then I retired from Facebook. Its job was done with me. So it's nice. A few more. This is another poem about dreams. And this one, I often say pardon my French because there really is French in it. There's not swearing, it's just French. I can't pronounce. So it's called Why Would Jesus Dream? The night before he knows he'll be stapled to a cross at 33, arsenic's atomic age, and how you say cheese in Spanish. Had the crucifixion been rained out in Jesus French-Canadian, he'd have been taken to the doctor's office where she'd asked him to say, trente trois, as she pressed the stethoscope to his needled body, listening to last breaths, his lungs like an LP by Alexander the Great and the Freemasons, while her other hand traced his spine, trying to account for all 33 of his vertebrae, because that's the number a normal human being contains. And I'm hoping my kids are almost in bed, so I'll read a poem for them at this point. Has anybody ever worn a baby Bjorn? It was a new experience for me, and I came to really like wearing it in some ways. But there was something about it that in certain situations I imagined it being embarrassing or strange, and it might take on new meaning. So this is a poem for anybody and everybody who's wearing one. Wearing a baby Bjorn into a liquor store with your 5-month-old, facing the thirsty horde of George C. Scotts and Betty Fords, like a chubby, ruddy shield. The undead stare, as they should. You were sad. A young man with a soft sacrifice strapped to your chest, and you were searching for anything that's 40 proof. Speaking of which, you've forgotten your ID, which you realize as you pull a bottle of bourbon off the top shelf, but you have a baby, for God's sake. Isn't that proof enough of your manhood? You squeeze the expensive vessel by its red, waxy neck and approach a register, getting in line behind Liz Taylor and Richard Burton, who are reloading. Your son makes prehistoric sounds at a window, and it's hard to say who is more of a man, you, George C., or the woman who's carrying nothing, pushing a stroller past the store without stopping. A couple of more. I grew up in the Midwest, and I don't know how many of you are, is there anybody who's not from here who kind of grew up in other places? And there's something about moving here, and like a lot of people, I think a lot of people stay here. A lot of people I know who are sort of either from here or Eastern Washington that kind of come over here and then they stay. And there's sort of a reason I learned why people want to live here and stay here. But I think if you sort of disconnected with your home place and are trying to make this your home, it's kind of hard at the same time, as much as it's a nice place to be. Connecting with the place and the people, it takes a while. This is a poem that appears on one of the Poetry on the Bus's poems, and I wrote it in response to the prompt of writing home. It's called Homeopathy. There's no place like field and base and run until the cows come. No place like town and boy and grown away from. There's no place like stretch and free and alone with nothing to write about. No place to hang your hat and ask, where is my heart? And here's another poem about the place I'm from, which is, I grew up mostly in Iowa, and I learned early on in my earth science class in 4th grade, why do we grow so many crops here? Why is the soil the way it is? And they talked about the particular kinds of soil that was there. We grew up in the Loess Hills area, and it was simplified to me, or at least my memory has it, is that in China there was also these kinds of soil. And somehow the soil was sort of somehow magically transported from China to Iowa to these other places, and there's these strange ways that sort of are connected. And I tried to sort of imagine some mythology around this, or how this would have happened as a 4th grader. And this is just called Loess. It gets in our drinks. Cans of beer sweating on red picnic tables, whiskey rocks melting in a windowsill. The ice age is coming to an end all over again. Fresh crops laced with silt wait for us in ambush at roadside stands, under cardboard signs, their prices hiding in the shade, in the husks. But it's only after we sit and say grace that the ground truly enters the body, coloring our hair and speech, hornblende and quartz. The wind started it, lifting heavy handfuls of China's jet black earth up and over the Great Wall, stashing piles and deep pockets of pink sky, cumulus clouds like wheelbarrows lined with a sweet yellow silver. And this fairy dust, blown out of an upturned palm, landed on our thawing state. This town's rain remains runoff, but still contaminates. We get up early, stay out late, shoot pool in mailboxes with long, greasy guns, waking up a dormant dust on jaded gravel roads. But this dirt made me. I can't help it. I breathe in. Dark prairie gas, ash-hot summers, the sand pit, sharp tan lines, mirrored sunglasses, stolen cigarettes. My girlfriend is asleep. She's floating face down on a striped red raft, bluegill swarm. The back of her bikini is undone, and I just bob there, next to her, treading the sour and warm water. And I've got one more poem for you, and this is one I'm going to dedicate in part to Martha, who you're going to hear from next. And Martha, is from here, but she spent a lot of time in Oregon and travels to Portland a little bit now and then. And this is a poem about Portland. My sister lives there too, and I have an affinity for Portland. Let's just call this kind of a love letter, but also a little bit of a restraining order as well. It's called Keep Portland Weird. Keep your voodoo donuts, your velveteria. Keep your Church of Elvis open forever. Keep your city blocks worth of books in print, and I'll keep this short. Like you, I'll opt out of terrorism task forces. I'll build 10 bridges across the river. Just promise me you'll keep your acupuncture project up and running alongside the urban Iditarod and your city commission government. Keep the change and I'll start bombing churches with yarn and hills with bikes. Keep your sales taxless, your water fluoride free, and you can keep pumping my gas. Just keep your distance from Seattle and easy drive.